Alright, we talked a little bit about what a computer is. We did not talk about how it works. So, um, this video will cover how computers work in a very basic sense. If you really want to get um, as much knowledge as possible, you're just gonna have to get your hands dirty and probably take an old computer apart at some point. You should do it with an old one, not like your family's main PC, because if it breaks because you took it apart, you know, it's not good. But if you take apart a computer that has, it's already broken, all the parts should still be there, and I think that's the best way to do it. That or build your own PC, which requires some learning because you're going to be spending some money on it, so you want to make sure you get the right parts, which is why it's important to learn how a computer works. Not just to build your computer, but to diagnose what's going on whenever you're using one. So, drawn here on the screen are all the basic components of the inside of a computer. Okay, so we need to start out with the main board, also called the motherboard. Okay, this board right here is called the motherboard. Okay, motherboard coordinates everything. The motherboard is going to talk to all these other components and make sure that they're able to talk to each other. It doesn't do much thinking on its own. Okay, it needs these other components to function. It is not a computer by itself. Okay, it simply coordinates everything. So, motherboard talks to all these other parts, right? And they actually all plug into the motherboard, okay, in order for that coordination to happen. So, the first thing that you might consider when you get a CPU, or when you get a computer, is the CPU, which is the processor. Okay, you'll also hear it called the processor. Now, popular brands for processors would be Intel here, or another one is AMD. Okay, you'll hear of both of these brands if you're into computers. AMD, Intel, and I think that's kind of it for who's making processors on computers these days. Anyways, processor does the math, okay? Does the thinking behind a computer. Now, generally speaking, the faster the processor that you have, the faster your computer goes, okay? So your processor actually plugs into the motherboard and stays there, right? This processor, let's say it fit in this motherboard, it would drop right into, let me get a different color, right into this slot on the computer, right? And that area is called the socket. It lets the processor drop in there, and it stays there forever. You probably never swap this out after you put it in. I'm talking about this like you're building your own computer, okay? You drop the processor in, great. Computer's ready to think, right? So let's do some thinking. I'm going to use an example for the next couple bits. You are walking down the street and look over at a restaurant that you had coffee at with your friend a year ago. And you remember having coffee with your friend. Okay? So, you saw the street, you saw the restaurant, you thought about the restaurant, so you used your processor, if you were a computer, to think about a memory, right? So, not only do we have to think, we have to be able to remember stuff, right? So the computer remembers using this guy down here, a hard drive. It remembers from the hard drive, and it stores things on the hard drive, right? Your hard drive is your long-term storage. And I say long-term because that's pretty crucial. So hard drive is what is used if I go to File, Save, and I save this picture from Paint here. It saves on the hard drive. It actually writes it to a metal disk, okay? It's crazy. It's like there's like metal CD-ROMs in there, okay? Spinning around, and it writes it to them. And that's how it stores it. And hard drives, the bigger the hard drive you have, the more you can store, okay? So this is long-term memory. Basically, stuff written to a hard drive can last years. In fact, decades, if not more than that. I guess if you stored it properly, it lasts forever, sort of. So this, once it's written, it's long-term memory, okay? That's that year ago when you had that conversation with your friend, you're remembering that conversation. You're using your hard drive if you're like a robot, okay? Now, here's one thing that you got to watch out for is you also need short-term memory. Okay, you're walking down the street. You have to remember you are walking down the street, right? There are cars on the street. You could get hit by a car if you forgot that you were walking down the street. I don't know how you do that, but if you did, you'd be in serious trouble. So a computer has to remember what's going on right now, right? Just like you're watching this video, you're remembering what's going on right now. Hopefully some of it's going to your hard drive in your brain, right? Your brain hard drive. Some of it is being stored here in this temporary memory, okay? Computer reads and writes to the temporary memory, and it plugs in right here, okay? And this temporary memory is called RAM. That stands for Random Access Memory, okay? RAM is what's going on right now. That's what that memory is there for. So right now, the computer I'm working on is using RAM in order to keep this picture open and letting me draw on it, okay? So the processor does the thinking when I draw the line or something like that, and the storage goes to RAM right now. Okay, it's temporary. No long-term storage is found here, okay? You know, you're walking down the street looking at the restaurant that you had lunch at with a friend a year ago. The part where you're walking down the street, that part, you may not, like, remember that in a year, just walking down the street. I mean, we walk to our classes or, you know, down the sidewalk or whatever. We don't really remember every, you know, grain of sand we saw on, you know, the side of the sidewalk, okay? It's just temporary stuff so you don't trip and fall right now, right? So this is temporary stuff so I can work on this image until I can save it to the hard drive, right? I'm trying to draw parallels here between, you know, your stroll next to the restaurant and how this computer works. So the other thing, so inside your brain, when you remember this, maybe you picture your friend and yourself having that coffee or that lunch at the cafe that you're looking at, okay? That, you'll need some kind of visual processing ability for that. Okay, and so for your computer to display graphics to the screen, and I'm talking about like what I'm looking at right now. This is, you know, something had to think about this image for it to come up on the screen, right? That is usually handled by what we call a graphics processing unit, or in short, GPU. Okay, you will hear about these if you go to build a computer. You will spend a lot of money on this if you are a gamer. Okay, so hang on here. If I have a GPU, my computer talks to it, and it talks back to the computer. It also displays graphics to my screen, okay? So it goes to the screen. That's where your screen plugs in, is it plugs into your GPU, okay? This is also called a graphics card, okay? You'll hear people call it a graphics card. Gamers have serious GPUs, okay? Big money spent on these if you're building a computer. So this measly one here is something like what you'd see inside of the computer, your high school computer, lab computer. Something like this will set you back a lot of money. I don't remember, maybe $700 for this graphics card. Okay, it looks really shiny and cool on the outside, but that really has nothing to do with it. It's all about the fact that that can play Battlefield at max resolution or whatever. Okay, and you can play all the latest games in high definition, right? Everything's gonna look nice and crisp, no lag on the graphics. These, there's a bunch of these, but the main brands that make graphics cards are NVIDIA. That's one brand. Okay, and the other one is AMD. So if you're shopping for graphics processing units, you probably call them graphics cards. You're gonna see NVIDIA and AMD come up a lot. Okay, remember AMD over here, they make processors and they make graphics cards. I'm not partial to anybody that makes these components. There's a bunch of people that make hard drives, tons of people that make hard drives, tons of people that make RAM, tons of people that make motherboards, okay? But really there's 2 players in the graphics cards game and 2 players in the CPU game, okay? So you are able to coordinate all your thoughts here with your motherboard. If you were a cyborg looking at the cafe, walking down the road, you would be using your RAM memory not to trip over the curb, because you remember what you're doing. You are walking, okay? And you are thinking about things with your processor. You're remembering things with your hard drive, and you are seeing things with your graphics processing unit. Hopefully that analogy works on how a computer thinks. Gets a little crazy, but the more you work with computers, the more familiar you will become with how they work. The important part about this is not just that you know which brands make which components. Okay, that's just for anybody looking to build computers in the future. The important part is you know what happens when you hit save or when you draw to your computer screen. Having this knowledge will make your use of a computer so much more effective over the course of your life. Really.